Jason Roan. Welcome to the BAPS Campus podcast series. In today's episode, we will be exploring the subject of law with two established lawyers in their respective fields. Our host today is Ruthugbai, who is studying English at Cardiff University. Joining Ruthugbai is Darshanbai and Chiragbai. Both Darshanbai and Chiragbai graduated with a law degree from the University of Cambridge. This podcast will explore how they got into their areas of law, as well as what motivated them to pursue a career as a lawyer, and any other tips for aspiring lawyers listening.
So welcome to this week's law podcast. I think just before we start answering the questions, I'd like to get an introduction to who you guys are. So I think my first question would be to both of you. How did you choose law and how did you get into law from university? So Darshanbai?
So I actually studied law at university, so I already kind of had an idea that I wanted to be a lawyer. And then obviously it was kind of a natural path from university to then become a barrister. So for me, it was kind of before university, I'd done some work experiences. I'd seen some barristers sort of in court, and I kind of realized that this is for me. So that kind of led me down that path. And then I kind of just stuck to that path throughout.
And Chiragbai?
Similarly, I also studied law at university, same university as Darshanbai, actually. For me as well, from a young age, my cousins were lawyers. So I had that exposure and seeing, the kind of work they do, the prestige, all of that kind of influenced that decision to study law. And then, having done a law degree, I took a different route to Darshanbai. I became a solicitor. So I don't see the inside of a courtroom. That's what I prefer doing, working in an office. Yeah.
And if you don't mind me asking, both of you have taken quite different aspects of law. And you both briefly mentioned at the start why you chose them. But was there anything in specific that made you decide to go into that field? I think I'd ask Chiragbai first because you just briefly mentioned on it last.
Yeah, so I think for me, it came down to what I enjoyed doing. And I did work experiences both at barristers' chambers and at solicitors' law firms. And it just literally came down to I enjoyed the work more that the solicitors were doing, and that's what I picked.
And Darshanbai?
Yeah, for me, it was a similar kind of decision in the sense that you do what you enjoy more, right? So I actually did more experiences with barristers than I did with solicitors in the lead up to going to uni. And I just found it really exciting, the whole idea of going to court and then sort of standing up and delivering arguments and things like that. And I think then when I did all of those experiences with barristers, I then had one with a solicitor's firm, which admittedly was quite a small solicitor's firm on the high street and didn't have that much exciting work when I went. And so when I went there and sort of compared the work they were doing to what I saw with the barristers, it kind of was like a, really easy decision. Maybe if I had, seen other solicitors' work, at that time, I might have had come to a different view, but I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing now. And I think it's really, enjoyable to kind of be in court.
And you briefly mentioned going to court. What would your daily routine be like as a barrister?
In current COVID sort of times, it is mainly working from home, but much of that is doing court work because now with COVID, they've adapted to the situation by having lots of video and telephone hearings. So I'm not sure I really have like an average day per se, because every day is genuinely really different. But probably 3 days a week, I have some sort of court work. And the other 2 days, I might be sort of writing an advice or drafting a legal document. So I get quite a bit of a sort of different mix of doing lots of different things, which is really good.
And you mentioned that this is quite different because of COVID, the COVID times. Before that, was most things in physical court where you have to be physically present, or was it a lot more online or behind closed doors?
Yeah, no, before COVID, they didn't really know or do anything on video. So it was all in person. And actually, there'd be quite a lot of traveling around as a barrister. So, one day I might have to go to Bristol, the next day I might have to go to Kent. So I'd be traveling in and out of London really regularly, sometimes doing hearings that, last like 20 minutes, other times doing hearings that last the whole day or multiple days. So yeah, no, like really, really different, really kind of exciting to kind of do different things and go to different places all the time.
And after a year of having online cases because of COVID, do you feel there's any setbacks, or do you prefer one or the other now, having dealt with both for a year or so?
I think there's advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are that you don't have to travel. So I save, huge amounts of money, huge amounts of time, just being able to stay at home. And in that sense, it's been really good. I think in terms of actual practice, the disadvantages are that it's never going to replace the real thing quite as well, particularly if you're sort of cross-examining a witness and you really want to get under their skin or kind of intimidate them a bit. It's very hard to do that over a video screen because they're sitting in the comfort of their own home. If you go to court in person, you really get that experience. And I think I also find it easier personally just to slip into the role of a barrister when I'm in that sort of atmosphere. Whereas obviously when you're at home, there can be distractions. You're in your own seat and it's kind of easier just to think of yourself as a normal random person on a laptop. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure which I prefer. I think it's nice to have a bit of balance, maybe if there's one or two hearings that happen by video. But I think the main ones still need to happen in person.
And I think you briefly mentioned cross-examining witnesses and speaking to the judge and speaking to the court. Is it what we see on TV or like what we see in shows, very like high impact, very aggressive, like very high pressure, or is it quite different to what we might have a view of in court?
I don't think it's ever going to be as dramatic as what you see in court on the TV. But yeah, there's definitely an element of drama to it. I think also much of what we see on TV tends to be kind of the American legal system, which is just way more flashy than what we do in England anyway. So yeah, there are definitely parallels and similarities to what you see on TV, but it's probably much more muted version of what you see there.
And is court work majority of probably what your time is spent on a case, or is it quite often more spent in the preparations for going to court?
It's a good question. I think probably my rule of thumb tends to be that I spend an equal amount preparing for a hearing as I do actually in it. And particularly when you're talking about hearings that last multiple days. But there's not just preparing for a hearing that I work on as well. Sometimes I have to, draft advices or have conferences with clients to talk about what a case is going to involve. So those things probably take up, quite a bit of my time as well. It's probably half being in court and half preparing or doing advices and stuff like that.
Thank you so much. And for Chirag Bhai, is your field of work quite similar, or you were saying yours is quite more office-based? So is it similar in any ways to Darshan Bhai's, or quite different?
Just listening to Darshan Bhai, actually, it sounds like we have completely different jobs. So I am a structured finance lawyer. I used to work in a law firm doing the same work, but I now work in a large Japanese bank. And kind of day to day, what I do is I advise on various structured financings, leverage finance, project finance, securitizations, swaps, hedges, anything where we lend money really to other companies through complex structures and documentation. So like I said before, I've never seen the inside of a courtroom in my career. Not at all, actually. Let's put it that way. And day to day, what I do is I look at the various documents, the transaction structures, and I advise the front office guys on any queries that they have, any issues, and flag risks that might be in the documentation to the bank. So essentially, I spend my time reading documents and liaising with other people, front office guys, ops, external lawyers, and other functions of the bank. So completely different.
And you briefly mentioned at the start you were in another law firm beforehand, and you mentioned at the start as well that you preferred the corporate way of law compared to as a barrister. But was there a specific reason why you moved from the previous law firm to this type of law or this field in particular, which is quite more structured and more finance heavy?
So I mean, I was doing the same work that I was doing in the law firm as I'm doing now. I think the main difference now, though, is that I'm closer to the business. So, I work for one client now rather than multiple clients. And I'm involved from the start. As soon as the bankers, the traders have an idea of this is what we want to do, they pick up the phone, they send me an email, and I'm involved from the get-go. Whereas if you're at a external law firm, you'll get the call or you get the email when everything's pretty much done, and they need someone basically just to type up what has been agreed. So that was getting a bit dull for me. Not to say that people don't enjoy it. People enjoy that drafting and they enjoy those complexities and that involves. But for me, I preferred sitting with the business and having that brainstorm, looking through the structures and sorting through all the problems.
So as you mentioned, like being quite closer to the client, does that mean it's a bit more of a different work environment to your previous firm, where there's a lot more face-to-face meetings, a lot more interaction rather than just drafting and reading and writing?
Yeah, definitely much more interaction. But again, it depends on what you're after. For me, this is great. I liaise with a variety of people, different functions all over the bank and outside the bank. But it is usually the same people over and over again. Whereas when I was at a law firm, you're dealing with various different clients that you have other law firms as well. But this is what I preferred and I'm really enjoying it.
Well, thank you so much for both of you giving a brief overview for what you do for a living. And I wanted to ask, were there any major surprises that you saw from your preconceptions about law or maybe what field you were entering until now, a few years in where you've settled in? Were there any big surprises or challenges you had to face? I'll ask Darshan by first.
I was hoping you'd ask Chirag by first, but no. I mean, I think that the ideal, right, before you go into a particular profession is that you've researched it and you've got the work experience under your belt, so you know what you're going into. And I was in quite a lucky situation that I managed to get a few work experiences under my belt before I started even at university. Then I got more whilst I was at uni. So I think in terms of the barrister-solicitor divide, I kind of knew from the start that that's what I wanted to do. And as I got through the work experiences, I got more exposure to sort of the weird ins and outs of how it actually works. So I think that aspect was fine. It was maybe in terms of, the different areas of law. I think there were maybe more surprises there because it took me a bit longer. I knew I wanted to be a barrister from early on, but I didn't know until quite late what sort of law I wanted to practice. And it took a while for me to figure that out. And so I currently do employment law and personal injury law. And for example, with employment law, there are all sorts of things that you kind of never really realize when you just hear about it or see it. And probably one of those things is that actually most of the people that you end up going in court against or seeing in court are people who represent themselves, which is quite an unusual feature of litigation. Certainly not what you would imagine law to involve when you sort of see it on TV or read about it. But I think that's kind of been one thing that surprised me about practice, I suppose, particularly in the narrow field or specialism that I currently work in.
And did you have to, you mentioned quite briefly, like there's a big change in your perception of what the law, what type of the many aspects of law that there are. Do you feel there's a good mindset to have when approaching law as a student or when entering a firm, of what type of mindset one should have to prepare themselves?
So do you mean in terms of preparing yourself for sort of entering the field of work from the field of education, or do you mean in terms of trying to decide what sort of area of law to specialise in?
I think both. More your first part of actually once you enter work, is there a good mindset that you should have, as it might be quite different from like you said, from studying law to actually practicing. So is there a good mindset you feel that will help prepare yourself for that?
I think so. I mean, I think you're right. I think there's a huge difference, because when you're in education, it's kind of always a two-horse race between you on one hand and the exams on the other hand. You kind of know that, okay, all I have to do is I have to revise, I have to learn my stuff, memorize, and then I sit the exams and that's it. But when you go into practice, what you realize is that you're now in a field where there's lots of different variables at play and things that will affect how successful you are. It's not just about your own intellect or your ability to memorize things. It's then about how you work in a team, whether you can cope with stress or your own expectations. And I think that psychological sort of factor, particularly when you start in law, because I think you're always going to be placed under a significant amount of pressure when you start, whether it's doing a training contract or doing pupillage. You're going to feel like it's a year-long or a 2-year-long interview that you're going through. And I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges that people face when you enter the field of work. And I think there you have to try and remind yourself that actually, what have I done to actually come here? Because by the time you've reached that situation where you're actually working and you've got a training contract or pupillage, you've already got past so many different people, so many different challenges. And I think there it's a case of just having that self-confidence in your own abilities and relying on that to help you get through it and believing in yourself that you can achieve whatever you want to achieve.
I also think that you need to keep an open mind. Like Doshanbai said, when we're in university, when you're being trained, you have these kind of conceptions of what that area is going to be like. One of the modules that you have to study is real estate. And going into work, I thought I'm going to be a real estate lawyer. I really enjoy that conveyancing. It's all fun. And that was the first seat I did as part of my training contract, and absolutely hated it. The next seat that I went to was in finance. Really enjoyed it. And then I didn't want to do litigation at all. It just did not appeal to me. And it was something that the firm forced me to do. I did try and fight them on it, and I was told, look, keep an open mind. You may end up enjoying it. And to my surprise, I really did enjoy it. And when it came to qualifying, it was between litigation and finance. And the choice was made by Swami. So I ended up going into finance.
And I think Darshan briefly mentioned how the training contract period for 1 or 2 years can be quite mentally not taxing, but you have to really prepare yourself. Were there any challenges that you found quite specifically for that training contract period? Or did you find you had to prepare yourself in any special way to help you go through those 2 years?
It definitely was a marathon. You go into that as a 2 years and you know that you're being judged, you're being analyzed, scrutinized, to see whether they want to keep you on after the 2 years, whether you qualify at the firm. And at the same time, it's an opportunity for you as well to see if this is something that you want to be doing. For example, I said that I hated real estate, but that provided me the opportunity as well to figure out actually what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. So it's a two-way thing, I think. The one thing that surprised me while I was a trainee was the responsibility that you get. I think trainee is probably the wrong title that's being used. It makes you sound like you don't know what you're doing, but actually you're representing the firm. You've got client contact. I was sent to Birmingham to HMRC one time to represent our client as a trainee. So the responsibility is huge. Partners will also pick up the phone, call you, and ask you questions directly. I remember answering a partner who's been in the industry for 20 years. I'm sat there, less than 12 months in, facing questions about tax regimes. So it is mentally demanding, it's challenging, it's scary. But I think the best advice that I got at that stage was, hold your hands up if you don't know something. Just say you don't know. Everyone understands, and that's the way you develop. The last thing you want to do is kind of start making things up and then get into trouble.
And Chirag, were there any other challenges or surprises that you found when entering your field?
The other kind of challenge, which I knew going in, the choice between a solicitor or a barrister, is the business advice that you're relied on to give. I knew that going as a solicitor, the job isn't pure legal advice. You're actually a business advisor. But what surprised me was to what extent that was true. So I think maybe I end up giving about 90% business advice, 10% legal advice. I'm not just there to tell these bankers and traders what the law is. My remit kind of goes beyond the legal world, and I end up transaction managing people's expectations and giving practical business advice. The other day, I was reviewing pricing formula and questioning the bankers, saying that, look, I think there's a mistake in the formula. This needs to be corrected. So that's the other reason that I thought, solicitor's probably a better fit for me, because I can give this business advice. It goes beyond just what's the law. So yeah, that's one thing that I thought was challenging and surprising. That only 10% of the advice I give is actually legal.
And was that surprise quite a welcome surprise looking back, or was it quite challenging when you had to quite figure out how to deal with it best?
It's very challenging because you're taught for 3 years at university, this is the law. And then you go into a job where they don't really care. Everyone already knows all of that. So what you're then doing is kind of learning on the job. You're trying to figure out what's commercial. What would you do in this situation? You're the guy who basically takes a step back and says, hang on, have you thought about this? What about this scenario? Or what happens in this situation? You're the guy who is protecting the company, who's looking at all the risks. It's very different to what the law says or what the statute says, and I think it's much more enjoyable. But that's a personal preference. But it's definitely something that I really enjoy doing.
That sounds very analytical and tactical. Is that just for your very specific part of corporate finance, or do you feel that's quite a generic aspect of corporate law in general?
I think that's true of corporate law in general. Lawyers these days, they're not paid to read out of a book and say what the law is. They're used as sounding boards. They give corporate advice. A lot of the time, it's just common sense advice, but it's still what we do.
And I think to conclude, just for both of you, is there one piece of advice that you would give as foremost to any student or graduate going into law? And also the final question would be, what's your most enjoyable part of what you do? I think I'll start with Roshan, right?
So I think in terms of one key piece of advice, probably I think the biggest challenge for anyone going into law is probably actually getting the right job, because it's so competitive nowadays. So I would probably gear my advice towards that, which is to really just have a plan and be patient. I think that nowadays what we see very commonly in the legal profession is that people don't necessarily get jobs straight out of university. they sometimes have to work as a paralegal, or they have to do some different types of work experience, all over, in all sorts of different fields or different settings before they actually manage to land the training contract or the pupillage that they're looking for. But I think my advice would be that, that unfortunately that's becoming the norm, but don't give up. I think that, you need to cultivate a strong sense of self-belief and self-confidence to be successful in any career. And probably that's very true in a legal profession as well. And so I would say that have a plan, in the sense that try and have an idea of where you want to go, what sort of direction you want to go, what sort of fields you want to be in from an early stage, if you can. If you can't, then at least have a plan that if you're not going to get that training contract this year or that pupillage this year, then do your best to try and get different experiences that will build your CV to help you then get something else that you might want to get. And then obviously, as I've already said, have that patience and that resilience to carry on through the jobs that might not be so fun, or the paralegaling, because you will ultimately, I'm sure, land the job that you're looking for.
And in your opinion, what would your best way to prepare be? Would it be a lot of online research, or would it be speaking to lawyers, or, like you said, going for experiences?
I think getting the actual work experience is by far the best type of experience you can get, because people can describe it to you, but ultimately, they will tell you things that they've experienced, which might be very different to what you experience in a different firm or a different setting. So I think that's the best, then followed by speaking to lawyers, then followed by online research. But really, to get the full picture, you probably need to do all three of those.
That's great. And Chiragway?
Yeah, like Doshenberg said, I don't think there's a right path to success in the legal profession or any industry for that matter. The only path that makes sense is the one that makes you happy and confident. So make sure whatever you're doing, you're confident with it, and you're happy about it, and you've got space to grow. But beyond that, never take anything at face value is the main thing that I've learned. Don't believe everything you read or hear, and it's okay if things don't make sense. Just question everything. Why does it have to be a certain way? What are the implications of doing something one way rather than another? And I think that's the best way to grow.
Just to end on a happy note, what would be your most enjoyable part of being in the legal profession? Chiragway?
I think for me, it's the complexity of the transactions that I get involved in and their high-profile nature. We're dealing with hundreds of millions of pounds and dollars on each transaction, dealing with well-known companies, getting intimate with them and their business. So it's never a dull day. Whether it's an airline looking to acquire another aircraft, or a Middle East oil and gas company laying a new pipeline, or the merger of two huge telecoms companies. It's always thrilling reading about something that you worked on in the press, and that's why I enjoy it.
That's amazing. And Doshenbhai?
For me, I think it's something I've already mentioned, which is the experience of being in court and conducting advocacy. For me, that's something that I really enjoy. It's dramatic. You've got the emotions rolling. You've got people who are scared, people who are frightened, and you may be helping them through the process, and on the other side, you may be scaring them even more by the sorts of questions and arguments that you're putting forwards. It's tactical because you're trying to decide what arguments to put forward, which ones not to put forward, and it's intellectual because you have to really get to grips with very detailed facts, detailed law, and then be able to present those in an easy to read, digestible format, which can be quite a challenge. So I think that all those challenges make it something that's really enjoyable to do and really rewarding when you get the outcome that you wanted in a given hearing.
Thank you so much for your answers. It was really interesting and quite valuable to hear the different aspects of law and what made you specifically choose what you went into. And I think that'll be quite valuable information for us aspiring lawyers to hear. Thank you so much.
That concludes this week's podcast. We hope you were able to take something meaningful away from our discussion. If you have any questions or feedback, then please do not hesitate to contact the team on campus@uk.baps.org. Jai Somra.